Howdy, everyone. Welcome to another episode. I think this is episode number 8. Can't believe it. Of Wild West Coding. I'm Ken Alger, and today I'll be continuing down the trail of an app developed in the Go programming language about rodeos. Now, back when I started this live stream series, it was the height of rodeo season here in the US. Things have calmed down some as we've entered December. Where did the year go? But the app I've been working on can still use some additional features and perhaps be set to go for rodeo season 2024. Since it's been a while since the last episode, a lot of stuff happened in November, wasn't able to attend. Sorry about that. But if this is your first time joining, or if you're just hopping back in, let me do a brief recap of where the app stands now before we start to wrangle some code together today. And if you haven't joined before, thank you for joining today and watching. And for those that have and are hopping back in, thank you as well. I'm doing this project in kind of a Wild West sort of way, which doesn't necessarily follow any guidelines, teamwork, or plans. Not an ideal situation for real world development or teamwork, but for a series like this where it's just me, I think it makes some sense, and it also allows for some fun tangents at times. Alrighty, as I mentioned, the application is built in Go, and it's utilizing the Gen Web framework. The application data itself, which right now is just mocked up data about rodeos, it's being stored in MongoDB Atlas, which is a cloud document database. And the app has a few features going for it right now that we've built out. There's an API for the rodeo data. There's a Swagger package that's installed, providing some documentation around the API. The API routes that don't alter data and just make GET requests, they're open to anybody. However, API routes that do alter data require user authentication. And I've shown how to do authentication in a couple different ways. One with JSON Web Tokens, or JWTs, and another, which is what the app is currently using, uses sessions and cookies. So check out previous episodes for that and how all that got implemented. User passwords are stored in the database in a hashed format using the Argon 2 hashing algorithm. Again, there's a whole video on that, and I'm working through that and how you implement that in Go. The next step of the app, I think, is to start working on the front end to allow users to register. And I'll be kind of start showing the web portion of the Gen Web framework and not just the back-end API stuff. And again, I'll make a very friendly disclaimer here that this is not intended to be a series on CSS, nicely designed web pages, HTML specifics, or any of those things. I'll do my best to polish things up at some point down the road, but really isn't going to be a focus. However, if y'all want me to go down a CSS tangent, leave a comment to that effect, in the video below, and I'll see if we can fit that in. Now, if you want to follow along, you can grab the project on GitHub. Here it's https://github.com/KenWAlger, that's me, /wild-west-coding-rodeo app, and notice the capitalization there. Feel free to download that, and you can follow along. While you're there, give it a star. There should be kind of the link spelled out on the video as well. Okay, so in the last episode of Wild West Coding back in October, we ended with a whole slew of errors happening when I ran the app. The web server wasn't serving web pages. It was just a hot mess. After reviewing the code, I put a couple of statements in the wrong spot in the main function. It happens, right? Especially when you're trying to do live coding. All right, so let me fix that. If we scroll all the way down here to the bottom, these two lines for the router, we're going to cut those and we're going to put them up where they're supposed to be. And let's see, that's going to be around line 65, right under the set trusted proxies. So we're going to load the HTML glob into the router. And I also noticed that I forgot an asterisk here to load all of the templates in. Okay, so let's see how this looks. We'll do go run main.go. And hey, look at that. We don't have any errors all over the place. That's good. And if we go over here to Safari and we reload our page, look at that. We have a web page with no styling whatsoever. Pretty amazing. Told you this was going to be a visual bonanza. All right. So let's look at a couple things back in our code here real quick. If we go into web handlers, let me minimize this. So inside the web handler for index handler, which is for the web page, I'm passing a value here of title, or the key of title and the value of home as the page title. So for the index page, I'm saying that the title value is home. And if we look inside our index template file, we're accessing that value here in the header for the page title, and you do that with the templating engine that I'm using here in Gen, which is the default one. You use curly bracket, follow, and then to access the data, it's a period, and then the data value that you're trying to access. So we were passing that with title. So we access that with title, and then you close it with two curly brackets. And then, just for kind of to illustrate the point a little bit here, we can access that anywhere. It doesn't just have to be in the header. So we can put that there. And if we go back over to the page and we do a page refresh, we should see that pop up there. There we go. So we have it there in home. We have it here in our tab for the page title, and that's pretty great. Now this is Safari, the browser. If you're using a different browser, it might look slightly different, but the functionality should be pretty close to the same, I think. Now I'll be coming back to this particular value here shortly, but I wanted to point this out now, as this is kind of the expected result in interactivity when accessing the data and passing it off to the front end. Okay, so let's see here. Now, one of the advantages of using a web framework such as Gen is the ability to utilize templates and reuse the code. We can use the templates, so the same code, such as headers and footers, can be updated just in one spot and reused over and over again. In the developer world, this concept is kind of called dry, or don't repeat yourself. Sometimes it can't be avoided, but when it can be avoided, it should be. So let me show you here real quick. Let me create another template here for the footer. We'll create a new file. We'll in the templates folder, footer.template. We'll add that to Git. So we're going to define a template. We're going to call it footer. So that's all you do to define it, and then you can use that name footer elsewhere in the code. And then you end the template with an end statement. And then you put in there the HTML that you want. And I'm just going to, for expediency's sake here, copy and paste, or cut and paste that in there, just to make it a little faster. And that little thing right there is not supposed to be there. That's supposed to be the copyright symbol. Okay. Now, so that's all great. And how do you use that? So if we go back over here to the index file, so let's look at closing tags here. So we have this closing body tag and the closing HTML. That would be used in any HTML page So we can take those out of our template file, right? And we can call in the footer template. Okay, so that seems like it makes some sense, right? We've defined the footer. We've now imported the footer, included that template into our index file. And if we come over here to our browser and our web page, sure enough, and let me see if I can zoom this in. That seems pretty small. Can we zoom in? There we go. That looks a little bit easier to see, I think. So, that's great. We have our data coming in, and we have our included template. So that's pretty great. Let's actually, while we're here, let's commit these changes. All right, and we're going to commit these, and we added the web homepage. And we'll commit and push all that out. There we go. Okay. Now, there is one thing that I discovered in my journey down the trail of GEM frameworks here that I really want to make sure I call out because it caused me some headaches for a little bit. So I showed a few moments ago how you pass the data from the handler, in our case, it's the index handler, to the front end and then access it in the HTML right here, right? We can access that through this variable in the HTML and in the header. Now, nested templates are slightly different. They're very easy to accommodate. They just require a slight change in the syntax here. But it's something you need to know about. What's a nested template? Well, it's a template inside another template, right? So we just kind of created one here with this footer. Our web app is calling the index template, and it's nesting in this footer template. So yeah, let's actually create another template here. I'm going to cut this out of we're going to create a new header template. All right, we'll add that to get. We're going to define this as the header. And we're going to end it. And if we paste that in, right, so now we just cut all that stuff out of the index file. We put that into the template file. So just like with the footer, that should be calling that in. If we come in here and say, hey, we want to also pull in the template header file and get that information back. So let's try this out now. If I go in here to our web page and we refresh the page, on the web page itself, nothing's changed. We've pulled in the header information and whatnot. But if you look real closely up here, our page title isn't coming through. And that's not really spectacular, right? It appears that nesting one template inside another one kind of stops that data flow. So let's go back here and take a look. So if we go in here to web handlers, or the web handlers file and our index handler itself, we're passing this title data with, right now it's just home. We're passing that off here to the index template. Index template then is utilizing that on the H1, and that was working, but it's not apparently passing the data to our header file here because that's not showing up. So that's not really a great experience and presents some potential limitations if data can't be accessed all the way up and down the nested template chain. Now, I'm sure I'm not the only one out there that wants to nest templates and still have access to the data values from the back end. Like I mentioned, there's a pretty easy fix to this. So if I go back here to the index.tmpl file or the template file for the index page, or for that matter, any page that's calling in a template. If you want to access the data from the back end, you just need to include one little minor change here in the importation of that. And you just add a period. Yep, that's it. Add a period to the template import statement. And now if you come back here and get it, you get your data back. So that's great. It's a small change in the code with a big impact on the app and the user experience. Now, beyond actual application functionality, when it comes to passing data to nested templates, such as user information for logged in or admin, etc., to a nav bar, for example, it can be a small thing as well. One example of things that I notice on web pages is the copyright date of the site. I don't know why, but I just do. It's typically in the footer of the page, which is where I currently have it down here. At the time of this episode, it's correct, right? It's 2023 right now. Just a few short weeks away, it's going to change to 2024. And be able to, or having to go in and update that for all the sites that you might manage is kind of pain. So being able to create a date variable and pass it to the footer template helps automate that as the date changes in real time. And maybe it's just me, but anytime I see a website with a copyright year that isn't current, or I've been noticing sites lately that are like, oh, copyright 2018. Well, is that, are those tutorials really that up to date? Is the site actually maintained? So automating that seems to, for me at least, helps to alleviate the need to manually update that every year. So actually, let's go in and implement that functionality into the app here while I'm thinking about it. So if we go into web handlers, this will be actually pretty quick and easy to do. So we're going to define a couple new variables. We're going to define date is the date of right now, and then the year, we're going to grab the year from that date variable. And then down here, we can pass in the year to our page, right? And then in index page here, we're going to utilize that here in our footer. So we're going to add that period and bring that data in. And then in the footer here, we're going to change this into the template of year, which is the variable that we named it. So now it's not hard-coded anymore, it's more dynamic, and it makes it much easier. So since I changed the code logic, we've got to start and stop, or stop and start, either way, the server again here. And now let's just make sure that that's all still working. And if we go in here, sure enough, there's no visual changes here to our footer, so that's a great sign, right? Like everything that we did on the back end and in the templates didn't change anything visually. So that's data passing from the back end to the front end of the app and through nested templates. The principle is the same here for other application data. Inside the handler function for the page that you're working on, you pass the data, whether it's static data, data from a database call, if you're accessing another API, whatever. Pass it to the front end through that gen.h, and you pass it that document. And accessing it in the front end is through the templating engine in the gen framework. Now, eventually, the rodeo app that we've been working on will want to display things like, I don't know, a list of the rodeos in the database. If you're an admin, maybe you want to see a list of the users, whatever. The templating engine allows some, minor function, programmability. You can iterate over the data set, display each record individually. I'll show that and a few other features of the templating system as we progress and in future episodes. For now, however, I think since we have data flowing from the back end to the front end, so that's data going one way, what about the reverse of that data flow? How do we grab data from a user and do something with it inside the application itself? A lot of possibilities there, but I think what makes some sense is where the app stands right now. There's an API that provides access to the rodeo data, has a variety of routes that can change the data in the database, right? You can update and delete and post new rodeos, that sort of thing. And those are all protected, require a user to log into the API. Right now, the application checks for a username and password that's stored in the MongoDB Atlas database, but there isn't a way for a user to register themselves. Right now, as an administrator, you'd have to manually go in and create each new user and manage and maintain all that, which is not great from an administration standpoint. So I think a good next step for the app, and one that will show data flowing from the front end to the back end, is to create a basic user registration and eventually login workflow. So that's what we're going to tackle here. So I'm going to need a few additional pages, one for registration, one for login and log out eventually. And from a user experience standpoint, I think adding some navigation would be beneficial as well. Let's stop the server here because we're going to be changing a few things. So I have, again, this is not a while or a course on HTML. So I have created some of these offline, and we're going to just kind of update everything here with some things. I've added a favicon, a nav bar, registration page, and successful login page, and we'll kind of walk through those. But let's run through how you connect the front end with the back end of the app, I think. So to start with, let's revisit our users model. And most sites, I think, require an email address as well. So we're going to add that to our model here. Email, and it's a string. And for JSON, it will be email. There we go. Okay, so we have that. We've updated the user model. That's spectacular. I think we're going to need a new handler here for all of our users. So we'll create a new Go file. We'll call it users handler.go. We'll add that to Git. And to start with here, like we've done in elsewhere, we're going to make a user handler. If we spell it right, it will make life easier down the road. And we're going to take a Mongo collection. And we want the context of context. We want that context to be brought in. And yes, we need our new user handler function handler, which will take our context and our collection that we're utilizing, and it's going to return our user handler. So we want the pointer there to the user handler, with the collection being the collection and the context being the context. All right, and then while we're in here, let's make the handlers for the pages that we're going to do here. So we want this to be part of the user handler group, and we'll call this show registration page, which will take context here, and we'll leave that blank for right now. And then we're going to need another one. Here, and this is going to be the register user page. Again, takes the gen context, and we'll leave that blank for right now as well. So the idea being here, the show registration page is literally going to show a web form. So this will be like the GET request for our registration, and then the register user will be what handles the post request. So actually, let's go into main.go here and kind of fill that out. So we need to define our user handler now, like we have these other ones. We want user handler, and it's going to be a handler and user handler. And I am having a tough time typing that today. And then we want down here, we want, let's put it under the auth handler, just user handler. It's going to be a handler's new user handler, right? And that will take the context, and it's going to be using the users collection as well, which because that's what we're where we're storing our data for that. Okay, and then we need to have a few routes here for our users. So we're gonna do here, and we're gonna just we're gonna do a route group again, like we have in the past for APIs, user routes, and that will be router.group. Let's just do a /u for the user path here. And so we're going to do user routes for the GET request here for register. We're going to do user handler, and it was the show registration page is the GET request. And then for the post route, that same path is going to be the user handler and the register user. Okay, so I think that's looking pretty good. Now, as I mentioned, I've already created the registration page template here. It's HTML form. The one thing that I will call out here is we're handling some errors here in the template engine. So if an error comes, if we want to send an error message in here, and if it exists, it will pass the message. Otherwise, it won't show anything, which is kind of nice. Everything else is a basic web form. We need to be aware of accessing things, so capitalization and naming and all that sort of thing. And then again, we're passing in the data here from the footer and the header, and I've added navigation and all that fun stuff. And the successful login page is pretty dull and boring at the moment. Again, I'll get to spiffing things up visually at some point. But for now, we need to go in here and fill out our users handler and all the specific handlers for the various pages. So let's start here with this show registration page. This should be pretty simple, I think. So we're just going to send back the context HTML. We're going to send the status OK. If you get there, we're going to load the register template, and we're going to pass in our title, and we'll say this is register, and we'll pass in year as the year, so we're utilizing that again in the footer. And we want that. All right. So that's great. We got the show registration page, which will just bring in that form. The more interesting and slightly more complicated one, but not really too bad, is this register user page. And this is where we're going to be getting the data that's being sent through that post request from this page to be able to handle it. So we're going to need to grab the data from the form and attempt to make a new user and handle errors if that doesn't work. And then log the user in, create a session for them, assuming that they can register. So first of all, we need to obtain the form data. And there were a few things there that are in the form that we're going to need to check. So there's the username, and that's the post form, and was username. And the email, which is a new field for us here in the database, that was email. And we're going to also grab the password because we want to check that for a few things, and then eventually hash it and store it if everything works. That name for that field was PSW. And then we asked for a repeat password just to make sure that users knew what their password was they were doing, and that was PSW/repeat. All right. So let's see here. If we're going to do this, we're going to, I think it'll be best if we make a new function here in a minute here. So we're going to do the register new user function, and we're going to pass in all the information from the form. Repeat password. And error equals nil. All right, so if we don't get an error back, we're going to create a new session for our users and log them in. So we need a session token. Session token, we want that to be an XID, kind of the string there of that, which creates a random session token. And it's going to be default. We're going to pass in the context there. Now we need to set a few values here for a session. We're going to set the username value as a username. We're going to set the token value for our session. It's going to be our session token. All right, let me bump this up a little bit just for visibility. Okay, and then we're going to just write one session. Let's do an is logged in value, and we'll set that to a Boolean value of true. And then we're going to save the session for all that. And then we will return the user to a different page here, right? So it's going to be our successful login template. And we'll pass in our information, title. We'll just say it's successful login page. And then the year that we're passing in is the year. Okay, that looks pretty good for that. Now, what happens if we do get an error? All right, so if we get an error, we want to send back that error message that we saw in our template, right? So we're going to send this back. We're going to send back a different status request. We're going to send back a 400, so status bad request. We're going to send them back to the register page. And we're going to include some additional information here. So our title, we want to still call that page register. The year won't change. Hopefully it doesn't take that long that the year changes in between things. And we need a colon, not a comma. And then we also want to include the error message. So we had a value of error title, and we'll just say registration failed. And then our error message value, we will pass back a custom error here that we're going to make, I think, in our register new user function that we have to yet define. Okay, so let's get to that. Let's define that register new user. Since we're going to be as part of that process hashing the password, we need to set up the all the hashing parameters. So I'm going to just paste those in here. It's part of the Argon 2 parameters. Again, check out a previous episode of Wild West Coding to see what all those are about. Let's bump up, create a little bit more room here just for visually make it nicer. And let's create this new function. So it's going to be a handler function as well, part of the user handler. And it was register new user. And we're taking the username, an email, password, a repeat password. And all those are going to be strings. And when we're done with this, we're going to return models user and an error. And there we go, which makes this little error message error happy because it now says, oh, that function is returning an error. So that's pretty great. So we need to start checking a few things here. So if we're going to get, we want to check our password, make sure the password isn't blank, right? So if the password is blank, we're going to return no user and a new error message saying that the password cannot be empty. And we're saying, now there's multiple choices for imports here. Import. That should make that go away. That's great. So what's next here? So we've checked the password is empty. That's a problem. What if, let's see, the password is not equal to the repeat password, right? That's a problem. So if those two aren't equal, we're going to, again, we'll return nil from the user standpoint, and we'll create a new error saying passwords don't match. And then what else should we check here? Let's see. We'll make a new function here shortly. Checks if the username is username available. And we'll pass in the username. And if that doesn't work out, we'll return nil and we'll create a new error for that one and say the username already exists. So we need to come back and implement that function for that. So if those, and that's all we're going to check here. I think there's other checks that we could do, but just for simplicity's sake, we'll do that. So if that works out, then we're going to do an insert one into our database, and we're going to pass in our user, right? So the username that we're going to pass in will be the username. The user's email will be their email, and their password. And here's where we want to utilize the hashing parameters. So we had in our utils and the hash password, we're going to pass in the password with the hashing parameters to save all that. And if something comes back and says, hey, we can't do that, and there's an error in that process, we'll return here, and we'll just say unable to register user. Sure. Okay, so if that all goes well, right, we need to return this information back to the other function that's calling it. So we're going to bring back username, email, email, and password is the password. Ooh, that wasn't good. And then here we'll return this and no error. And we need an equal sign there, otherwise it's not happy. And here we want there. Okay. So we still have this function here of is username available that we need to implement. So let's take a look at that. Again, we'll scroll up here, provide a little bit more visual room. So all this function is going to do is check the database and see if the username is in existence inside the database. So it was called is username available, and it's going to take a username as the string, and it will return just a truthy value, Boolean value. So this is going to be similar to what we've done elsewhere over in authentication. So we're going to try this. Handler collection, find one. Right, so we're going to see if we can find a user or document inside the database that matches the username. And then we need to decode it to our user model. Right? So if now we do a little bit of error handling, we'll return true. Otherwise, we return false. And there we go. We don't have any errors in there. That's great. That should cover it. And again, to be fair, right, there's some things that a production app would probably do as well. We're just checking for the username. Probably should check if the email address already exists so that you don't have the same user with multiple, or one person with same email address being used over and over again with different email addresses. Anyway, this is what we're doing for right now. Feel free to implement it yourself and make a pull request on GitHub, or I might come back to that separately. Who knows what will happen here in the Wild West. Should probably also add some documentation for all these new routes. But for right now, let's run this and see what we get here. Okay, so no errors there. That's always a good sign. And if we go back over to our browser and refresh, my expectation is that we will get, hey, look at that. We get our little navigation. and home. And if we go to register, oh, looky there, an amazingly nice looking web form. Yeah. Just kidding, folks. If you're a designer out there, sorry about this. I probably should spend some actual time in CSS to make things look better sooner rather than later, because honestly, this is making my eyeballs hurt. All right, so let's try and create a user here, and we'll do some real minor error testing. Let's say this is Bob, and it's bob@rodeo.com, and we'll do 2 different passwords. So with 2 different passwords and hit the register button, should get back an email, or not an email, that'd be fantastic, but we get registration. There's our error message saying that passwords don't match. Okay, so that's good. In a previous episode for the API, one of the users was me, K Alger, and we'll just say can@rodeo.com, and we'll do some magical password of 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So our passwords are matching, but we have a username that's already in the database. So we should get back saying, username already exists. Hey, that's great. All right, so let's make a real user here. Username. Let's say Jeff. Don't know where I got that name from, but we'll say Jeff@rodeo.com. Jeff has really secure passwords of 1, 2, 3, 4 for this app. I'm sure he has better passwords elsewhere, but we have a username that hasn't been taken, an email that we're not checking, passwords match, and if we register, yeehaw, you have successfully logged in. So that's fantastic. And if we go over here to MongoDB Compass and look at our users, we have Jeff here with his email address, hash password, and there should be a new session here as well, which judging by the timestamp and whatnot, I think that's probably the session that we just created from our good friend Jeff logging in. So that's Fandabby-Dozy. And if you know the reference to Fandabby-Dozy, A, I'm sorry, and B, let me know. Yeah. Okay. So let's. That's all looking good. We're seeing the errors that we were expecting, the 200 and the 400 when we're getting errors. So let's commit our changes here. Registration web page, and we will commit these. Push those up to GitHub. That's great. So I think the next steps are going to take a little bit of time to do with the log in, log out, and I want to spend some more time on some additional features with that, things like 2-factor authentication. So we'll make this episode a little bit shorter than normal, I think. But let's do a quick recap of where the app stands. So I think it's worth doing. So we have an API that has CRUD operations, so create, read, update, and delete through HTTP requests. Again, those are all in future or previous episodes of Wild West Coding. The API routes that make changes to the database require authorization, and we just implemented user registration so that they can then go in and access the data. User passwords are being hashed before storing them into the database, so they're not just plain text stored in the database. That's never a good thing. We have templates being built out, right? So our code can be as dry as reasonably possible, especially here in the Pacific Northwest where we're having flooding. Dry is a good thing. Sorry for that dad joke. We have data that's being passed from the back end to the front end. Right now, it's pretty static. Page titles, copyright year, error messages. But you got to start somewhere, and we'll see how we can pass in other data later on. And again, we can register for the app through a web form on the front end. That looks amazing. Just kidding. And it passes the data to the back end for data verification and storage and whatnot. Like I mentioned, there's still a lot more to do with the user login flow. And I'll tackle that in the new year, along with integrating, like I said, some multi-factor authentication into the app during the login process. So this is the second to the last Wild West coding for the year. It's my last work on the Rodeo app for the year. Next week, December 12th, will be the last episode of Wild West coding for 2023. And I'd like to do something, again, off script of the Rodeo app, and instead do something kind of fun to celebrate the holiday season. So come join me on the 12th at 9 a.m. Pacific to have more fun with Go and, well, go out of the year with a bang, and you'll get that reference next week. Until then, happy coding.